with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. The second resembles it. You must love your neighbour as yourself. On these two commandments hang the whole law and the prophets also. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
In the words of the Gospel, wipe away all our sins. So St. Aloysius Gonzaga lived in the late 16th century, around the same time as mentioning yesterday on Catechesis, the same era, if you like, when the Irish martyrs were being hung, drawn and quartered here, the late 1500s right through the 1600s. So he died in 1591 and was born of a very wealthy, noble family in Italy, but died at the young age of 23, having entered the Jesuits and having left behind all the great wealth and trappings and inheritance that was to be his, and instead embracing the poor, and died in the service of those suffering with fever at the time. And we're familiar now, of course, too closely with the idea of a pandemic. So St. Aloysius gave himself for it, and a beautiful letter that we read in the Office of Readings this morning to his mother, commending her, of course, but also commending his soul to the Lord. Complete innocence of life, as the opening collect of the Mass was saying there, and a complete commitment of himself. So a great model as he is, patron saint for youth today. And with World Youth Day coming up, we can do with lots of those models indeed to direct us and guide us and show us indeed how we are to live and how we are to grow and mature in our faith, in self-giving. And so the readings remind us of the simplicity, as it were, of the calling to do what the Lord has commanded us to do, and his commandments are not difficult. And the reason they're not difficult is that God's grace is there to supply for us, to help us on that path of following that law. They're made difficult, of course, by our own weakness, our own propensity to sin, and further, indeed, made difficult by the ways of the world, which has no time for commandments and rules, at best. Will abide by them when it suits the world, of course, but we cannot but be affected somehow by the propensity to sin that exists in our world today, and it does weaken our resolve, indeed, to stay committed to the gospel. And yet, the task at hand, again, is not complicated. The Lord, putting it very simply to the lawyer in answer to his question, loving the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, and mind. In other words, committing ourselves wholeheartedly to seeking first the things of God and putting God first. So coming to Mass here daily and joining us online is certainly seeking that place, rightful place for the Lord. And he gives himself to us then to nurture and nourish us in the second commandment, which is that of loving our neighbour as ourself. And indeed, that's not raising the bar so high that it's beyond our reach either. And as we know, when the Lord comes to the end of his ministry at the Last Supper, he institutes a new commandment. It is to love as he has loved. And no greater love than he includes in that priestly prayer, those admonitions at the Last Supper, than to lay down one's life for one's friends, which is what St. Aloysius sought to do. But it follows on, and that grace comes if it is we're seeking to put God first and seeking to love others as we know we ought to love them, as we would wish to be loved. These are the stepping stones then to that love than which there is nothing greater, the willingness to sacrifice our very selves, our very being. So such are the commandments of the Lord, and by his grace and by his mercy, and through this sustenance that we receive in the sacraments, especially here in the Holy Eucharist, the nourishment we draw from God's word, and the healing power indeed of his mercy in confession. These are prime instruments in allowing us to stay close to him and to serve as he has loved, and to love as we are called to after his example.